On today's episode of the Connection Codes podcast, we are going to be answering a question from our listener, which I think is one of our favorite things to do. We do like to talk about sex, but when we have questions come in, it is just so fun to connect with you. And this listener describes her emotions as one big ball of yuckness.
Yes.
She is having a hard time distinguishing any of the emotions other than joy. So that is what we are going to do today. We are going to dive in and do some focusing on shame and guilt because I know that's really difficult for a lot of people, but we're going to hit on each emotion to how you can identify it in your body. And so with that, welcome to the Connection Codes podcast. This is the podcast where we break open our emotions that take us from being disconnected to connected in our relationships and in ourselves. I am your host, Tiara Wages, and joining me is marriage and family therapist, clinical sexologist, Dr. Glenn Hill, and his incredible wife, Phyllis, where together they have founded the Connection Codes, which is the guide to human connection. And we're so glad you're here.
Yes. Hello, world.
Hi, friends.
Should I start by reading it?
Oh, yeah. Why don't we do that? That would be helpful. Yeah.
Okay. So she is writing to us from Australia, which
Yes, so
I
fun.
absolutely love. Hello, Australian friends. And she says, I'm really confused and seemingly unable to discern the difference between some of these core emotions. So even as I've listened to both of you do the will at the end of each of your podcast, I still struggle to differentiate between shame and guilt. They seem so closely linked to me, and it feels really different to express them separately. So when I'm feeling sad, for example, I usually have a few other emotions as well, and it's all bundled together in one big ball of yuckness. Joy is the emotion I can easily explain and can do that really easily.
Yeah. So, I think I've been mulling it over in the sense that, as most of you know my story, I definitely was raised with joy is the only acceptable emotion. And so it was, many years, I was around 50 before I learned that my brain actually houses emotions. And that whole story is just so huge for me. But being who I was, it's like trying to touch each of them was a challenge for me. I know the very first time Glenn, as he was trying to help me, because I was really having a health crisis through it all, just because I was so shut down and my mom was dying. And Glenn just kind of touched on the idea that I was sad. And I just responded just with this snarky, I don't have time to be sad. I'm not doing sad. And it, I knew what sad felt like. And I believe there was more to that, even in that moment, that I didn't really unpack until years after my mom died. And that was that I was experiencing a lot of fear that I would go back down the road that I had gone down when my dad died. And my dad died when I was 25. And Glenn and I were already married, and we already had a couple of children, 2 children. And I had a year of barely being able to function, like just crying all the time. And I remember laying in bed a lot. Like, I know that I had to take care of my children, but I just don't know that I had much else that I was able to do.
Right.
And so then fast forward about 25 years, and my body is saying, ooh, this is what you're about to go through again. This is what it looks like. And I had so much fear around that, kind of like, I don't want to do that again. But instead of expressing the fear, because I didn't even understand emotion, it's almost like even before Connection Codes, which all happened around that time, for me, it's like, oh, as a believer, my mom's dying and she gets to go to heaven. So joy, joy, joy. And so it was like, okay, I hear the message of, oh, she lived a good long life, and oh, she gets to go to heaven. So you better be feeling joy. And joy was not what I was feeling. definitely feeling sad, but I think a stronger emotion for me was that fear one, where I'm like, I have so much fear of going back into that deep, deep, dark grief that I went through with my dad. And so that was the beginning of my journey of even starting to understand emotion. And it's kind of one of those where I think, and I'm really glad we're doing this podcast today and just kind of diving a little deeper into the different emotions and being able to tune into yourself. And I mean, right off the bat, I would say if you've not read our book or you've not done a masterclass, you are missing a pretty big chunk of all of this as far as, because on the podcast, we're kind of talking as though you guys already know all of this information because you have read the book or you've done the masterclass. So, we don't necessarily deep dive. We use terminology that's already been taught in all these other things. But I think that one of the things I've learned is that the more I do this, then I begin to be able to see and really tune in and really understand what's happening for me.
Right. I agree with that completely. Same for myself. And I know Wes would say the same. And he was also someone who would have probably described it as one big ball of yuckness as well. The identifying of the separate ones would have probably been very difficult for him 3 years ago. In fact, he would boast that he'd never felt fear. He had fear over nothing. And I 3 years ago didn't realize how closely I dance with shame and how it impacts me on a daily basis. But that's something that I really do love about the connection codes is how simple that you have made the tools. So whenever you look up emotions, there's all these other different types of emotion wheels, and some of them have 100 different emotions on there. And I do think that is really powerful to be able to see all of them. I mentioned recently, I didn't realize that tired was considered a sad experience. And something about realizing that tired was sad really settled in my soul. It really just felt peaceful to me as soon as Glenn told me that. And so there is power in seeing all of those emotions, but being able to narrow it down so it's not so overwhelming for you and being able to just look at the 8 core emotions helps you to slowly dip your toes in to then you can go into the bigger picture of everything else.
Yeah, I've shared before that my mother's a psychologist. She's not practicing anymore. She's 95. But she has a book that she gave me, and I think it was 140 emotions that they would hand a sheet to people and say, so what are you feeling today? And I'm thinking, you're going to spend a 45-minute counseling session sorting through 140 emotions. And this is long before I understood the brain chemistry of it, but to realize that we're incredibly complex beings, but we're actually kind of simple in a way. And I think that helps people to realize that, oh, okay, it's a simple thing. Let's just narrow it down. And it's really just 5 neural regions. So to try to sort through 140 emotions, how in the world are you going to do that ever, but certainly not going throughout your day? To always be thinking, okay, I've got 140 choices. What's happening for me? What am I feeling? What am I experiencing? That's exhausting. Whereas if you realize, well, no, it's just 5 neural regions and 8 core emotions, we can learn that language very, very quickly and narrow it down and convey it certainly with ourselves, but convey it to the other.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And that has been able to help me communicate it with Wes. Yeah. I will say that in end of 2021, I think it was, I read Brene Brown's Atlas of the Heart. And I consider it the dictionary for emotion. And so if you, speaking to the lady who wrote in, are struggling understanding what these different emotions are, that may be even a great place to start is to read the dictionary of emotion. And then from there, you can see which ones you're identifying with and, okay, well, what is the core emotion I'm feeling? Oh, okay, well, hopelessness, that's the one that it was really healing for me to read that book. I was in a place of hopelessness. And to know, okay, this is a pain experience. This is a sad experience. Then I'm able to now communicate that to Wes in a way that I was not previously. Previously, if I was just like, oh, I am sad. But then reading what hopelessness was, whew, it was so changing. And so maybe start by actually reading the emotions, the definitions, and then applying, being able to turn them into the connection codes of what the 8 core are. So let's talk about the 8 core emotions.
Yeah. Well, I was just going to say real quickly, and that's just one example of many, but for you to say to Wes, I feel hopeless. I mean, I know Wes fairly well. I imagine he doesn't know what to do with that. That is so big. That is so intense. And he adores you, and he's thinking, oh, so my partner is hopeless. I don't know what to do with that. Whereas if you're able to say to him, I feel sad, it activates sadness in his brain. It becomes a shared human experience. It's very connecting because he knows what sad is. Every human does on the planet. And that's part of the beauty of the 8 core emotions is every human knows what it means. When you say overwhelmed, anxious, depressed, people have some idea, but they don't know exactly what you mean by that. Whereas if I'm able to convey to Phyllis, this is exactly what's happening with me, again, one of the 8, she tunes into that very, very quickly. And there's actually some research that says that whenever I say fear, it tickles the fear region of her brain, and then she connects with me because it's a shared human experience. Yeah, it's amazing. So the 8 core emotions, so where do we want to start with that?
She mentioned shame and guilt specifically. So let's start there because I do know that those are hard for people to navigate.
Yeah. And we hear that, that's one of the more common things that we hear is people are like, oh, I can't distinguish between guilt and shame. Well, the reason for that is because your brain doesn't distinguish between them. The only reason we divide them up on the core emotion wheel is because people look a little bit different. But frequently, often, if not a good majority of the time, people will say, oh, I felt guilt and shame. I felt shame and guilt. So that's not wrong to do. It's fine for you to, identify both of them or specify both of them. But what we observe...
I want to break that down one. So your brain doesn't distinguish the difference between guilt and shame.
On a brain scan, we can't. And understand, brain scans are like snowflakes. Every one of them, they look similar, but they're actually... Each one is distinctive, so we can't say that, oh, well, it's a red button that goes on, and therefore we know that it's guilt, or it's a blue button that goes on, therefore we know that it's shame. Every brain scan looks unique because every human is unique and every experience is unique, but we can't distinguish thus far, as I know, any difference between guilt and shame. If you just look at them, and we can tell people their emotional experience with a 93.7% accuracy rate just based on looking at their brain scan. But guilt and shame are not distinguishable as far as I know. And someday that may change. We may be able to see the difference. But it's body language. You typically, for example, when people say guilt, they look up. When people say shame, they look down. And again, every human's unique. That's not an absolute. We're not saying, well, that's true for you. Well, probably, but there are outliers in every area of human behavior. So typically guilt is over an action, something I did. I missed on that. Phyllis asked me to pick up milk from the store. I just forgot. I just blew by the convenience store, didn't pull in and get it. And I just feel guilt about that. I'm not feeling wretched about myself as a human being, although that was true for me many years ago, a little side note. But now I realize, oh, darn, I forgot. And it's just an action. Whereas shame is typically over my essence, who I am. I am a bad person. I am not good enough. I'm not worthy. Either I'm viewed as not worthy or I don't feel worthy. I don't feel worthiness, as far as my interaction with another person.
Now, you started off by even saying something specifically about shame. Can you repeat that about yourself?
Yeah, that I didn't realize before how I dance with shame on a regular basis.
Okay.
I deeply struggle with shame.
Okay, what does that mean in the sense of even what Glenn just said, that on a brain scan, it looks the same, which is the disgust region of our brain.
Right.
So instead of saying you dance with disgust, you didn't say that, and you didn't say I dance with guilt. But you said I dance with shame. And I've heard that from many people who will say, I feel a lot of shame. So break that down, because there, to me, even in that statement, tells all of us that there is a big difference between guilt and shame.
Right.
Because of just even the wording. So what does that mean to you to say I dance with shame?
Totally. So, and not to say that I don't experience guilt. I experience guilt every single day, over my actions for sure. But I have been able to very well separate the two. between I feel guilt because I yelled at my kids, or I feel shame because I am a horrible mom who cannot control my emotions, or I feel shame because I feel judged by other people. Not for some reason, I come from abandonment in my life, and not just one situation, but I've experienced multiple kinds of abandonment at high, intense levels. And so I never feel worthy. And now as an adult, I can see how that plays out of everything I do. I'm afraid that I will be judged. And not only will I be judged, but those people will abandon me. And so, which my friends tease me that I'm like put my life out on the internet, that I share this vulnerable stuff, and that I had a podcast where I talk about sex, because they're like, that goes against who you are so much. Like you're putting yourself out there when your greatest fear is being judged for what you're going to say. And it is this weird thing about me, but I recognize in myself when I feel like someone doesn't like me, when I leave a group of people and I think, oh, they hate me. I said stupid things. Like I am not worthy of them talking to me. I disagree with them on whatever matter came up. And so therefore they're going to judge me. They don't want to talk to me. And I live in that daily, regularly.
So is there a difference? Because you also said you have fear of abandonment, fear of rejection, but you would still put it under the shame category.
Yeah, I can separate those two feelings of knowing that it's fear, but I have the fear because I have the shame. I think the shame starts it, and then the fear comes out of that. And then I've learned about myself that my secondary anger, I'm usually present as angry when I'm fearful. And so, which I think we talked about on an episode recently. And so I can just see how my emotions, so when you talk about a ball of yuckness and how often they're all wrapped into one thing, that can be so true with a lot of situations that you encounter. And for me, it often starts with the shame, which then will either lead to the guilt or the fear and then the anger.
Wow.
Yeah, and to also bear in mind that we can experience all 8 core emotions in the exact same instant about the exact same thing. So it's not like, they take turns. You can get flooded very, very quickly. And I mean, you picture one of those things called bottle rockets, where there's just this explosion and there's 35 different little explosions at the same instant. Well, that's exactly what's happening in your brain. It's not that you go through each one. It's like, well, okay, I'm going to feel shame for 3 seconds and I'm going to feel fear for 5 seconds. They can all happen simultaneously.
So back to the shame, because I know you have expressed that that's something, I don't know that you've ever said you dance with it, but it's
I just swam
home base,
in it.
swam in it.
That's a good way to say it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So describe that. Like what does that mean for you when you say that?
Yeah, I mean, for me, and I've said numerous times that I probably get hit with shame just as much today as I did 30 years ago. But 30 years ago, if you'd say, Glenn, how often do you feel shame? I would have said never, because I was drowning in it. Does a fish know that it's wet? Well, I don't know. I've never interviewed a fish, but they're just surrounded by water, so they don't even think in terms of, oh, my goodness, I'm wet, I'm in water, I think. I've, again, never talked to a fish about it. But so I was so drowning in shame all day, every day. And I remember the first time I said to you, I don't know how far into our marriage that was, but I said, my hope, I start every day hoping to claw my way up to 0. Well, of course, you're seeing me from the outside because you're like, oh, he's a competent, funny, it's actually really cute back then, person. So how is that possible? But I'm living inside of me, and I viewed you as someone who started every day, maybe not at 100, but 93, 94, and then you just cap it off, by lunchtime. Whereas I'm thinking, I hope to claw my way up to 0. And it's still, the last 2 or 3 years of my life have been so bizarre to me because I actually like myself now. And it feels weird to me. It feels wrong. Literally every day I'm like, I'm having fun. I'm liking me. I'm liking my life. I'm liking us. I'm liking what we're doing. I'm liking how we're living. And then there's that voice that goes, this is bad. This is, evil or sinful or something. And it just feels weird because it's new enough to me. And I don't know how that will, transition over the next year or 2 or 5 or 10. But I lived most of my life in such deep, deep shame that I didn't even recognize it. I wasn't even aware that it was happening.
So it's fascinating to me, I think, because I have a different narrative, right? So, but I think, wow, you were abandoned. Your dad died when you were 8. That was a huge abandonment. And your family kind of fell apart after that. Your mom was just trying to survive.
Yeah.
So in a way, you lost her too, because she had to go to work, got multiple jobs just to keep food on the table. And so it's interesting that you mentioned the word abandonment. You definitely lived in that. And I do, it's interesting because you come from a faith-based background.
Yeah.
So it's like if I said to you guys separately, have you always believed that God loves you? Well, how would you answer that?
Well, if I had to give a one-word answer, I'd have to say yes.
Okay.
Yep.
I'll take a one word. Would you say, what would your answer be? Because I think that sometimes I was kind of giving you a little bit of a trick question there. Because I think sometimes because we're faith-based, it's almost like there should be no shame.
Yeah.
Because God loves you. So
Right.
that's the truth, and you need to hold on to truth. And it's just super tricky, because if your brain is firing disgust, we need to tune in. It's our messenger.
Yep.
And, I like hearing both of you, and knowing both of you well, like, I would love to just give y'all a pill so that you could not experience that.
Yeah.
And I know even in our friendship, I feel like we've talked about this a lot, where you kind of have that shame / fear that you're going to do something, and then like.
Yeah, because my personality really sucks with shame being the issue, because I have a very bold personality, and then the shame comes right after that boldness, and so it is a tricky spot to be in.
It is interesting because Glenn has a bold personality.
Yeah,
and doesn't always filter well, and we've shared a lot about that. And so it's interesting that what you both portray would, to me, not be the definition of anyone who had an ounce of shame.
Yeah, you're right.
Like an ounce, like almost kind of like the two of you should be able to go, can't even relate. Like, feel so good about myself, I can't even relate. And yet both of you dance or swim with shame. And, I think that it is definitely much harder for me to distinguish the difference between guilt and shame. What helps me is to understand that guilt is over an action and shame is over my essence. And so when I slow myself down and I go, okay, I feel guilt that I missed with you this morning, but the shame is more that, like, I know I've shared this even at times when we do the wheel, like about my essence. The shame part comes in because I don't stay true to what I know, or true to who I am, or true to my goals, like that I struggle. Like there's where my shame sits, where guilt is, man, I didn't email you back. I feel guilt about that. And it's interesting because when I express guilt to you, like when I say, shoot, I feel a lot of guilt that we have not responded to that email, that almost doesn't make sense to you. Like, as in, where's that standard? Like you know, sometimes you come back at it like how many minutes would you have to give yourself to respond to someone before the guilt kicks in? Well, I don't know that, but that is at times I often, not often, but I'll start an email saying, oh, feel a lot of guilt that we've not gotten back to you, or feel a lot of guilt that, like, I start emails that way, or text messages, you know, and because that's what fires in my brain. So that is true to who I am. Like, I do have a high standard for myself, and in a lot of things. And so that's just part of who I am. But I think that to understand just that kind of helps me so much. Guilt is over an action. Shame is over who you are, like your essence.
Yeah, and then to say guilt is what I did, shame is who I am.
Yeah. I think that kind of breaks it down where and I do think when we do the wheel, the practice of that is to get you to slow down enough to tune in and to ask yourself, well, what is happening with me when it comes to fear or shame? Like it is, we can define them, which may be helpful. If you're listening to this podcast, you may be taking notes and going, okay, let me write that down. Shame, essence, guilt, action, okay. But I think that sometimes it's also that we are pilgrims on a journey of trying to tune in to ourselves. Right. And I've shared this on multiple podcasts that this season right now, this first quarter of 2023, I've been just seeing and realizing that anger is a hard one for me to touch and to open the door to and to really experience. That I've shared. For me, anger, I go more towards, I feel angry about the war in Ukraine, instead of I feel angry about something personal, about something within close to home or close to myself. And a lot of that is because of how, as a child, I defined anger, and it was very scary. And so even just in the last few months, I've described it as a black hole. And if I open it or go into that, I'll never get back out. And so there's a lot of fear for me around anger. But I'm just learning. If a year ago, if you'd have said that, I'd have been like, oh, no. I just, I wouldn't have seen it about myself. So I think that's the other beauty of being on this journey and using this simple tool. It's like, we are reawakening something. We are tuning in. It's a messenger. We often say that if you're faith-based, God didn't make a mistake and put this region into our brains that we all have and then go, shoot, I didn't mean to do that. Or to put it in our brain, and then the message from God is, I only want you to experience joy. I gave you all those other ones, but I gave them to you just to trick you.
Right.
Now I want you to spend your whole life not touching those.
Well, but would people say that that's the devil?
That put them in our brain?
Well, no, but that it's his message telling you to feel fear.
Yeah, people
I'm just
that
curious.
I hear that a lot, certainly, and I would say a majority of our clientele are faith-based people, and yeah, that's very much a message that I hear over and over again. It's just the last few years that we've even come to understand this, that this is just neural regions. This is literally what's happening. We breathe oxygen not because we choose to. Well, 1,000 years ago, we didn't know that. And everybody was breathing oxygen, but we didn't understand, well, that's just what the lungs required. You can't put ice cream or sawdust in there. It just doesn't work. It has to be oxygen based. And I know it's a combination of some other gases too, but it's predominantly oxygen. So we didn't know that just until it's probably, I don't know, maybe 20 years or so since we've even learned that it's actually just science. It has nothing to do with theory, opinion, a mindset. It's just the science of what happens. So I do hear that people say, Satan puts fear in it. There's a song that was out, and my understanding is the guy that wrote it's a really nice guy. I don't know him. But it said fear is a liar. Well, that's just like saying oxygen is a liar. And what does that even mean? Oxygen is a liar? I mean, I'm breathing oxygen. That's just what's happening to me. I'm not choosing oxygen. I'm not trying to breathe oxygen. I don't get up every morning and go, what am I going to do today? I know I'm going to breathe some oxygen. So fear just is actually a messenger, which doesn't sound as catchy as fear is a liar. But fear is a messenger. Shame is a messenger. Guilt is a messenger. And it's just tapping us on the shoulder. And it's not our dictator. We don't have to do exactly, you're allowed to jump out of an airplane. Well, I hope you feel fear, because if you don't feel any fear, you're not prepared. You don't get a parachute strapped to your body. etc. So these emotions are just messengers trying to nudge us, tap us on the shoulder, tune us in to what our needs are, to what the next best action is, because otherwise we make really, really poor choices.
Yeah, I think that's so good.
Yeah, and even there, I think there was a line in this email that came to us that said, kind of like, always been taught that the more you mature, the less emotions you have. Yeah. And even defining emotion, we're breaking it down into the 8. But even defining like that word emotion, or, oh, she's so emotional, or, he's so emotional. So we get confused even on that terminology. We were doing a group Q&A the other night, and one of the guys said, I've always thought that it was a sign of maturity to not have emotion. And he said, the connection codes has kind of blown my mind because I sure didn't know that there was a region in my brain, and God created me, and wow, like it's a messenger, it's my guide. And he said, I've been real judgmental, like thinking, oh, I'm more superior. I'm, better than because of that.
Yeah. And he was very humble about it, but very authentic as well. And he said, I've always judged my wife. And I don't remember how long they've been married a while. And he said, I was always trying to get her to be less emotional, to get up on this level where I am. And he said, this has just blown my mind to realize, oh my goodness, maybe she was actually more advanced than me. Maybe she was actually doing better because she was actually tuned in, whereas I had simply mastered or perfected the ability to suppress, deny, ignore, step around.
Yeah.
And I thought that made me superior. And he said, I've realized just the last few weeks that actually that was a great defidency for me. So it was just mind-boggling to him, very revolutionary.
Yeah. I think sometimes even we will, even with culture, we'll be like, oh, wow, that particular culture, group of people, they are super disciplined and they have no emotion.
Yeah.
And
that's what the writer writes in and says.
Yeah.
She's Australian, and she said that Aussie people tend to be, what did she say? Like, put
super
together, laid
Yeah.
back. Yes. Things don't affect them as much.
Yeah. And also super authentic, as in like what you see is, what you get. Like, and then she said, I think we've really missed it as a culture because we don't have emotional intelligence. And I think there's definitely, we've worked with a lot of different cultures through the last few years, which has been super cool. And yet it's that realization, wow, you may have been raised that way, but that doesn't mean that's what God intended, or that's your authentic self. Like you may be, and even there are some cultures that show a lot of emotion. And so we even say, oh, well, look, they're so in tune with their emotion. And yet so often it's that they are acting out of that emotion, not communicating the emotion.
Right.
And so that can do a lot of damage too. It's not one or the other. It's just when we all realize, wow, okay, this is our messenger, this is our guide. We're supposed to tune in. The body keeps the score, so we need to know how to process, which means you tune in, what's happening with me? Wow, I'm feeling fear, and then I say the fear. That is processing. Like that is getting it out instead of storing it in our bodies.
Right.
And so, okay, so we've talked about, even with fear, I want to say, like for me, when Glenn first talked to me and was teaching me about emotion, I was like, Wes, I'm not afraid of anything. So I was like, seriously, genuinely, like, I'm sorry, I can't even relate because I'm not afraid of anything. Well, then for myself, I had to realize that my definition of fear was being afraid of the dark, being afraid of heights, being afraid of elevators, being afraid of public speaking. Oh, nope, don't have any of those fears, so I don't have fear. And then as I learned, well, wait a minute, you're defining them on a list that maybe other people's situations, but that doesn't mean you don't have a communicator up there of fear.
Yeah, because we all know you're afraid of mice.
Thank you. I'm glad you brought that up. But never was that on my list. But it's like, wow, there's a communicator here. Like I have a message of fear. So what is it? And to realize for me, it was almost what I would call a deeper level, like fear of rejection, fear of failure.
Right.
And as a business owner for many years, I was dealing with fear of failure every single day. Like, and the bigger the company got and the more people that worked for me, the fear was stronger because I was responsible for all these people. And if I didn't have enough clients, then I didn't have enough work. Then they couldn't get all their hours in. And if they, there was just so much fear, but I didn't realize it because I was defining it very differently for myself. And so I had to really tune in and be like, okay, what does this mean for me? What is the message? So if you're listening to this, it's not like we can define it for you. In some ways, you've got to slow yourself down and go, okay, I need to dig into that. And I do appreciate what you were saying. There are other things like Brene Brown has done so much work on emotion. I'm the kind of person, though, for me personally, keep it simple. I need it to be simpler. That's why I love the simplicity of the core emotion wheel, just 8 emotions. Like I can get that. Because I think even sometimes we sit around, I think somebody mentioned the word overwhelmed.
Yeah.
And you go, okay, well, we probably, if we put out certain words and said, now write in, without anyone else knowing what you're going to write down your definition. Surprisingly, a lot of us would come up with very different definitions of what that means. And even when you said the word hopeless, like, I think that is so strong to go, okay, you say to Wes, I feel hopeless. First of all, it doesn't tickle anything in his brain because it's not a word that is defined in that region. And so then he often, what we do with words that we don't fully understand, we define them according to what it would feel like for us.
Yeah, we fill in the blanks.
We do fill in a lot of blanks, but through our own lens, through our own experience. And so then that word, we talked about this on a podcast a few weeks ago, even the 43 feet.
Yeah.
And to go, okay, when you say hopeless, I'm thinking you're at 43 feet ready to jump off a bridge.
That's what hopeless is.
And so where someone else may hear that word and give it a 2.
Yeah.
And you're like, whoa, we just really missed each other. Because when I say hopeless, I'm at 43.
Well, and that's what she defined it as. It's often linked to suicide, and I was having suicidal ideations at that point.
Yeah.
And so being able to actually put a word to what I was experiencing and share that definition with Wes through tears was like, no, I'm not just sad.
Yeah.
Like I'm at 43 feet of sad. And so we have a podcast that we did just put out talking about the feet, the level of emotion. And so when you're looking at, if you decide to dive deeper into emotions, like the full dictionary, they subscribe a number to them.
Yeah.
Being able to say I'm at 43 feet of sad is very, very different than saying I'm at 2 feet of sad.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah. And, I think that's really good to even realize you got so much out of Brene's work because of that word, hopeless.
Yep.
If someone's not read that book and that person hears the word hopeless and doesn't understand that definition, they may look at hopeless as a 10. And then again, for themselves or the other person who's sharing, kind of miss that, how big that is, how much that really does define. And so, it's like we're all on a journey where we experience things. Just like for me, and I'm still like, I feel like I've shared some about anger, the black hole thing. I think I'm still like just peeking in, so it's not a physical experience for me at this point, but I know other people have anger at a 43 feet where they are in that black hole, not knowing if they can get out. And so even that one word feels very different for all of us, like when we're sitting around a table talking about that word. And, I think that it kind of goes back to just for us to have that emotional health and to really dive into this it's just like an incredible journey. We often say we're pilgrims on this journey because we definitely haven't arrived. And I don't know that we ever will because you continue to break it down. It's like a messenger forever. It's not a messenger in your 20s.
Right.
It's like, this is going to be my message. This is my brain center that's going to be my messengers for the rest of my life. And so it may look different, feel different. I tune in now. I experienced sadness in 2020 that became a physical experience, and I could feel it coming on. Like I'd never done that before. It was like a black cloud that was engulfing me, and I would have to get outside really fast. And often I had shoes by the door, boots, because we live out in the country, and I would grab my boots and I'd slip them on and I'd run out the door, and Glenn just knew. And sometimes if he was nearby, I would yell, but if he saw me outside so often, he knew what was happening for me, because it was a physical experience, but I'd never had that physically.
Yeah.
That sensation, that feeling, that knowing, wow, that's what sad feels like. Whoa. And so you may be in a season where one feels stronger than the other, when one looks different, and I think that that's, again, where we have a common language. No matter what language we speak, we have a common language in these emotions, but we may be defining them very differently from each other.
Yeah, and I would encourage people, I think the best way to do that, to distinguish, to differentiate, to figure out, just keep asking, using the 3 phrases, just go, what is happening for me? What is happening? What am I missing? Seems like I'm missing something here. What am I missing? What is happening? And you'll find it. It's amazing to me. And of course, we do this in session with people all the time. And it's amazing how fast they can do that. And they have wrestled with it for years and had no idea. And now they're able to find it literally in 10 seconds, 20 seconds, even if it's 2 minutes, so what? So they are able to walk themselves through it to discover what's happening for them. And they've never realized that before. So the 3 phrases, I'm a big advocate of those. They're just so powerful to help people walk through. And, as you always say to discover, or I can never quote what you say, but in relationships and in ourselves, because we have to know ourselves, we have to find ourselves, we have to discover ourselves before we can reveal to the other. Because if I don't know me, I can't convey it to her. And there's power in doing it together, but at some point I just have to recognize what's happening for me.
That one of the other words I think that often is a little confusing is loneliness, where people only define it as in being without other humans. Right, yeah. And so there's times we hear people go, oh, I'd do anything to have a day without people. Like, I love being alone. I just, and it's like, well, that's not the only way to define loneliness.
Yeah.
It can be that feeling of, I am all alone in the responsibility of taking care of these children. I'm all alone in the responsibility of caring, for my mother. I'm alone. I'm feeling all alone in the financial support of my family. Like, it doesn't have to be a human in that scenario. It can be just that feeling of alone. And
or I'm the only one who understands this thing about me,
Yeah.
And to recognize lonely as a pain experience for somebody, especially parents of young children. Oh, it'd be joy to get an hour, 6 hours alone. Alone is joy. But that's not a pain experience. Lonely is when you feel unsupported, unconnected, that you don't have people that are safe for you. So if it's a pain experience, then that we would label that as lonely.
Totally. I think that was so helpful, and hopefully for our listener, that was insightful just to even hear, mostly focusing on shame and guilt. I know that not only are those the 2 that she mentioned in the email, but we hear often from people that there's a really hard time distinguishing that. And so recognizing that guilt is over an action, and it doesn't even mean that you've done anything wrong. I can do something right, by world standards, and still feel guilt about it. And so it's over an action, a tangible action. And then shame is over who you are. And that there's something wrong with you. You've shown up as a poor version of yourself, or that you're misinterpreted and not understood based on who you are as an individual. And so like Phyllis had said early in the episode, if you have not already read our book or done our Foundations Masterclass, that is really the launching point. Those are the starting points to understanding what we're talking about every week. I love seeing people that are listening. Our numbers are growing, and that means you're sharing. But also, we created this podcast as an additional resource for people that have already began their Connection Codes journey. Right. There is no way for you to get all of the information in this format and the way that we teach it through our book or our masterclass. So you can go to connectioncodes.co/podcast to start your journey. And the book is definitely go on and buy it today. It's such an easy resource to get your hands on. The Foundations course is great because you can sit with your partner, you can watch, you can listen, there are experience assignments, and it just dives so much deeper into all of this material. And we have payment plans available. We want anyone to have access to these materials. And so please reach out if you need any additional support with that. And we close out every episode by doing what is called the core emotion wheel. And that is our 4-minute tool that teaches us not how to identify the emotions in our body. The goal of the tool, yes, is for you to connect and co-regulate with someone else, especially your partner. But the whole vision of the wheel is so every day you can know what shame felt like in your body and what guilt felt like in your body. So now you can identify it happening in the moment.
Yeah, especially when people recognize it's an exercise. You are exercising your emotional muscle. Because for most of us, it is atrophied so horribly. As I said earlier, for me, if you said, Glenn, how often you feel shame? I would have said never. I had no idea, zero clue that shame was this ever-present thing for me because my emotional muscle had atrophied so much it didn't work at all. Just completely unexercised. And that's what we're doing with the core emotion wheel experience is exercising.
And before we go into that, based on that, if you are, if you get to the shame on the wheel and you're like, I have no idea, you can make something up. The goal is to either say the most recent experience, and if you cannot think of one, make something up. I have a 7-year-old son who often will make up the emotions when he is doing the wheel, but he's spot on what that would feel like. I would feel lonely on an island by myself. And so we roll with it. So the goal is just to show your brain how it feels in your body.
Wow.
So good.
Yeah.
All right,
so
here we go.
Okay.
I believe we are.
All right. Who's going first?
Oh, I guess I will.
Thank you for volunteering as tribute.
Thank you. Guilt. Definitely felt guilt that I resisted your energy this morning. Feel shame when I forget to slow down and tune in. Let's see. Feel fear. I think right now there's a lot happening in the connection codes and feeling some fear just about making decisions and doing the next best thing. I think some fear in that. Anger. We've been attacked on social media a good bit lately. Feel core level anger about that. Same time, feel sad for people who are hating on us. Hurt. I think that for me, the hurt most recent probably is when you and I are off. I think that the hurt for me is that I think we go deep too fast. And so I feel hurt in that there's not more lightheartedness in it all. Wow. Seems so big, so fast. So that's my hurt for today. Lonely. I think there are just lonely moments in that just because I miss you. Like I missed you this morning and I was being super task oriented, but it's like I feel lonely on the task front of our life at times. So, joy, or did I miss any of the others?
I lost track.
Just joy.
Joy.
There's so many of them.
Joy. I feel a lot of joy getting to be outside with you these days, being in the backyard, being all the work that's getting done. It's that time of year when my hands are in dirt a lot right now. A lot of joy being outside with you.
Let's see. For me, a little bit of hurt this morning, just not feeling seen, not feeling heard with you. I feel sad afterwards whenever those interactions happen for us, and then end up in loneliness, just thinking, "Dang, we're not bonded. We're not connected in this." A lot of joy that we have the tools to work through it, to process through, and we have so few of those, which is startling to me that that's even possible. Guilt and shame, just that I get knocked off so vastly and so quickly, which again, we go for many, many days without anything like that. But when it does happen, it can really punch me in the face. Let's see, anger, some anger about some of the stuff that's happened the last few weeks, because we just have too much to do. And there's a world out there waiting for help, waiting for assistance, and just annoying the distractions, and just a lot of sadness in that too. It's like, oh my gosh, we don't need, and there's always going to be people that are mad at us and haters and whatever, but we just have a lot to get done. Fear, let's see, gracious fear. When's the last time I felt fear? That's weird. That's interesting. I'm not even aware of fear which is very unusual for me, because I lived in fear most of my life. Dang, that's bizarre. I don't.
Wow.
Make something up.
When was the last time? When was the big time?
Goodness. I guess fear, just sorting through all of this stuff as a team, as a company, the light at the end of the tunnel, the light on the other side to get to that. What all is it going to take? How long is it going to take? Because again, we have so much to do to try to get all that done. I think that was 8.
Thank you. So that is how you do our core emotion wheel. And there is a video and resources online, again, at connectioncodes.co/podcast, where you can get the rules, because this has been heavily researched on how to do this and not create more damage in your relationship, and actually experience the connection that you're looking for, and get the exercise that your brain and emotions need in an effective way. And again, it's only 4 minutes a day. So we are so glad that you are here. And I want to thank this woman in Australia for writing in and asking us this question. It was such a great conversation, and I really hope that it was helpful for each of you listening. Be sure and share this with your friends. And if you've not already given us a 5-star review, please click below and do that. It is so helpful for us in the algorithm and all the things. So thank you so much for being here.
Because in Australia and Nigeria and South Africa and Russia and everywhere else, you need this.
You deserve this. So let's do this.
Let's do this.